get started, I'd like to introduce our speaker. Today we have Ralph H. Hershberger. Ralph is president of Madera Associates, LLC. Madera works with technology-oriented startup businesses to align their business development, financial management, and operations. He has significant experience working with state and federal startup funding programs. In addition to writing dozens of client funding proposals, he was for 12 years an SBIR STTR proposal reviewer for the National Science Foundation. He has reviewed hundreds of submissions and was one of 10 reviewers selected by NSF to develop their I-Corps program. He has held senior management positions in 3 startups, including VP Sales and Marketing in an advanced materials firm, general manager for a manufacturer of electronic components, and financial manager for a startup veterinary clinic. Prior to founding Madera, he was COO/CFO of the Nielsen Wooster Group of Princeton, New Jersey, an engineering consulting firm that provided dispute resolution, risk management, and management consulting services to the global construction industry. Most recently, he was the mentor and resident at the Arizona Center for Innovation at the University of Arizona in Tucson. He is the past president of the Southern Arizona chapter of SCORE, and he also holds a BS in metallurgy and material science from Carnegie Mellon University, and an MBA from the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. So Ralph, I'll let you get started.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I'd like to encourage you to ask your questions when you think about them. I want to reinforce that because so many times I've been in these, and by the time it gets to the end, I forget what I wanted to ask. So between me and Allison, your question will be addressed when you either go with an unmute or a chat comment. I'm going to pull up the PowerPoint. Okay, does everyone see that at this point?
No.
No. Okay, what do I have to do here?
So did you click the share screen button?
Hold on.
Okay.
Share screen, right?
Mm-hmm. And then
there it is.
Okay.
How about now? No?
Yep. It's
okay.
Yeah, it shows your slideshow with the slides on the side as well. So if you do presentation mode, it'll be good.
All right, we're just going to leave it like this. Okay, we've gone over that. The only reason I show this slide is to emphasize that I've looked at the startup world and startup and small business world from just about every perspective, as a participant, as an investor, as a mentor, as a person of the review teams at NSF and NIH. And my opinion is for startups and small business, there isn't anything that comes anywhere close to delivering the value for someone looking for money. And I'm always kind of amazed at sometimes when we meet with clients initially, particularly when I was out at the mentor in residence role, how naive they were about how they're going to get money. And we have to kind of go through a shock therapy to get them to understand that this is 10 times harder than they thought it would be. So here's what we're going to go after. I'm assuming you don't know anything about SBIRs or STTRs. We'll talk about that difference, how to do it, how to go about it, how we review them, and then some questions that I've seen come up frequently, and then an opportunity for you to ask others. The history is pretty simple. SBIR and STTR are actually a similar program. They're addressing the same needs. We'll go into the definitions in a minute. It's essentially a set-aside program established 1977 by the National Science Foundation. Currently, that's been expanded to 11 federal agencies and multiple sub-entities within those agencies. And you'll see that in one of the following slides. NSF has really kind of been the driving force for the evolution of the program as it has made changes and evolved. And the biggest change was quite a few years ago, Congress went to NSF and said, hey, look, we're giving you $3 billion a year, and we have no idea if we're getting any value in return for it. So we want you to introduce a commercial element in the review of your proposals. And that's actually how I got involved. I was approached because that was my world, business development for techie companies. And so now at NSF, it counts for half of our evaluation. Other agencies don't put as much emphasis on it, but we've noticed over time, they're all gradually catching up to that 50% level. So the SBIR stands for that, and approximately 87% of the awards are for SBIRs. STTR is for an SBIR in conjunction with a public entity, usually a university, and that has a much smaller percentage of them. As a biased comment, I would encourage you to try to do an SBIR simply because an STTR is infinitely more complicated from the standpoint of administration, particularly budgeting, and it's certainly a doable, and it's a worthy program, but it's a lot more work. That's my own bias. Someone else may disagree with it, but all right. Who's a small business? Pretty straightforward. Cannot be a nonprofit. Occasionally, we get something in that once, a nonprofit typically has a very strong driving social force, but this is not what's for them. Small businesses doesn't have to be a startup. Small business, 500 or less. PI must be employed by the company. That sometimes is a problem if the proposal comes out of the academic world, because the PI has to have usually 50% of their time, and many academic professors want to maintain at least 50% of their university presence to keep their benefits and so forth. So we have ways to work around that, but just be aware if you're coming out as a particularly tenured professor. And it must be owned, majority owned by a US entity. So here are the participating agencies, and I've had them ranked ordinally by the amount of award money they made. Defense, so that's all the Army, Navy, Air Force, DARPA. DARPA is a huge funder of these programs. We just had one from the Office of Naval Research. I've been very impressed with the range of defense solicitations. It's quite a few of them are for medical advancements for injured service personnel. It's all not just bombs and airplanes. Health and Human Services, that's where NIH comes over, and the 30 institutes that they have, National Eye Institute, Cancer Institute, and the CDC, Energy, NSF, and then you can see the rest. And in the next slide, you'll see why those top 4 have the most proposals and award money. This is the frequency of their award cycles each year. You can see leading the list is NSF 4 times a year, which is basically a continuous rolling application period. The next cycle closes December 3rd, and the next one opens December 4th. Energy, DOD are 3 times a year. That's usually pretty good. The rest of them are, I'll call them bit players. Probably collectively, they represent maybe less than 15% of the award money. I think it's important to understand where the money sources fit into the evolution of your business. I did my first startup in 1990, 30 years ago, and at that time, we were entirely funded by venture capital people. And now that's completely reversed. They won't come near a startup of the type that you're most likely to come up with. Now, you read stories about the crowd out on Sand Hill Road in Palo Alto walks in and he's recognized to be a unicorn, $5 million check as he walks out. Well, that's the exception that proves the rule. This is the normal progression of funding based on where you are in your technical and commercial development. SBIRs, STTRs are a huge part of that because they validate what you're doing to the remaining 3 entities that are considering funding you. Even though angels like to think of themselves as risk takers, yeah, they are within a very narrow silo. And they want to see some type of credible validation that your idea and company are real. I'll pause. Any questions or anything? All right. So why am I so big on this? Well, look at the other potential sources of funding. You have the friends, families, and fools, which, you know, your rich uncle will give you 10 grand, but probably not a second or third time. Banks, commercial banks, they don't want any part of this. Far too risky. And they'll want 3 years of statements. Well, if you're a startup, that's kind of difficult. Angels, yeah, but they're going to take a piece of your hide, and they definitely go in herd mentality. They love favored verticals, areas that they are familiar with. Venture capital, as I mentioned, they've moved from early stage to mezzanine, later stage. SBA loans, when we started the vet clinic, we looked at that, but they are all over the map in terms of rates and what they expect. Plus, they want you to put your house up as collateral. Microloans, you know, that's for small, under $1,000. You know, that's not going to get you anywhere to where you need to be. So, how much are we really talking about? These numbers are for the NSF, the current stage of NSF. Phase 1, which traditionally meant proof of concept, they'll award you $256,000. Phase 2, which is usually assuming successful phase 1, and you're moving into a prototype phase, $750,000. The third phase, 2B, B is their designation for supplementary award, and those are matching grants. That is, they will match up to $500,000 on a 50% basis of any other money you bring in. So that might be money from the Ben Franklin Partnership, other state entities, a competition that has a cash award, anything that is any other type of cash. Investor money would be an obvious one. So, and those are really automatic. That is, when we look at that proposal for a B award, we just go down and check the boxes. Did they do this? Did they do this? Here's the money. Here's the evidence of the award from the other entity. It's a 10-minute exercise. So if you get the money, that's an automatic amount. So why are we doing this from the NSF? You get 1.506 million, plus you went out and raised $1 million to satisfy the supplementary award amount. So this is what you're going down chasing. And I think that's significant for a startup, even a small business that has a new product line. Here are the same numbers for NIH awards. Now they're a little bit bigger on the back end, but it's the same entity. Now they don't have a B program. Now, these solicitations change with each release, so. But that should give you a pretty good runway. We just had one come through NIH and the Eye Institute in the spring for 1.36 million. And this is why you want to do it. It's a grant, not a loan, and SBI awards are non-dilutive. Nobody's taking a piece of your company. And the way these things work, you frequently will have to go back for successive rounds of financing. And each time that happens, the investors are going to take a piece of your company. And if you're getting up in the third and fourth rounds, pretty soon you're down to 5%. And all it's really doing is just working at a job at that point. So that's why the SBIR program gives you that. You're able to avoid the frequent returns to the markets for cash. And going back to the group I just mentioned that got the 1.36 from NIH, they were pitching us at Desert Angels in Tucson. We were helping them, my group was helping them prepare the entity. And the night they were giving their final pitch, they had received information that afternoon. They got the award from NIH. And so it was a very brief presentation saying, thank you for listening, but we got our money, and that's an 18-month runway for us. So we may be back in 2 years. So, but they didn't have to give up any of their company. And believe me, in the initial phases, it's all about equity dilution. So how do you get started? Well, it's a government program. And so that means there's lots of administration stuff. Regardless of what you're doing, you're going to have to get an LLC designation, or if you want to be a C Corp, that's okay. We like LLCs to start. Obtain an EIN from the IRS. DUNS number, SAM, is another federal agency. Register at the SBA website. And these are pretty easy registrations. That is, you fill in the box, what's your, and this is done sequentially because you'll need a DUNS number to go into SAM and that kind of thing. Then you might want to go to the appropriate agency you're considering. They have their own registrations, grants.gov. Fastlane is the platform that NSF uses. And then go through the specific agency websites, start combing for a domain, a topic area under which you want to submit your ideas. Domain selections. NIH and NSF are open solicitations. By that we mean, first of all, they are not the end customer. You define the problem and propose a solution, and then start looking for a relevant topic area. Most of the other agencies in their solicitations have determined what problem they want solved, and you are merely proposing a solution. So it's a much tighter range of applicability to what your idea might be. That's why I like NIH and NSF. I mean, if you can create the case, they will consider your ideas and proposal. DOD is usually very specific. We want to land 2 platoons on the beach at night in rough seas. What's your idea? And, that can work too if you have a specific thing that fits that particular requirement. Now, right now, these are the current NSF domains. A domain is a topic area. Each domain area has a dedicated program director who will manage the process. These change almost every cycle. When I first started out at NSF, nanotechnology had its own dedicated domain. And that's when nano was hot, it was going to solve everything. And then gradually over time, that herd kind of disappeared and they rolled it in with materials. And these are changed just from the last cycle in the summer. One of the comments I could make is these program directors are very sharp and they usually have pretty deep knowledge about the particular areas that they're responsible for. So you're getting a fair hearing, is what I always tell clients. All right, are you ready? This is kind of a quick check to see where you are mentally. There are 2 elements in an NSF. One is the technology. We want to make sure that it's an innovation and not a repeat, proof of concept. And we look at, can the work be done in 12 months? We also look at the team. And what we're talking about a team is a very balanced team, particularly anything coming out of the academic world, purely academic world, tends to be very top heavy on the technology side and very light on the business side. We tend to take a dim view of that. Now, it's okay to fill those gaps with outside consultants. They don't have to be hired. They don't have to be part of that company. But you do need to address the requirements of a balanced team. And you got to address your commercial side. It's always nice to have a business plan that you can allude to. It gives you a good format to develop your storyline. NSF has pushed very hard the whole idea of customers, and even have a term for it, customer discovery, which is a key element of their I-Core program. We'll go into that in a minute. You can mention if you've looked at other financing, but they pretty much understand if you're coming to them that you don't have any other options. It's okay if they want to be, I get a question quite often about whether or not you have to be a big company. I mean, we've funded lots of, Ralph's Garage Industries and one or two people. It's all about the idea and the planning and our estimate of your ability to execute the plan. We like people who've had a startup experience, but it's not required. Once again, I'll refer to NSF. This is a little bit different from a lot of funding. They want the 5-run home run, high risk, high payback innovations. They do not fund evolutionary optimization. And we have a phrase, I think I pick it up later, incrementalism is fatal. They don't fund market studies. It is assumed you've already done that through your customer discovery and combinations of existing technologies. That's their language. We've seen some relaxing of that, particularly in the domain of Internet of Things, where Internet is being applied to other technologies. So I wouldn't let that discourage you if you think that's a reasonable assessment. Whenever you write anything, you want to remember who you're writing for. Two groups, the program directors and the panel reviewers. That's us. The panel reviewers, NSF and NIH, use outside experts. Many of the other domains have their own in-house people. A typical review panel consists of these reviewers divided between technical and commercial expertise. They all have extensive experience in those areas. Many have in-depth knowledge. The program directors have a stable of reviewers they like, and they start to know what spaces that they have deep knowledge in, and they tend to gravitate and try to put a panel together that represents those options. So your proposal will be reviewed in depth by 2 technical and 2 commercial people. Prior to the meeting, we each receive abstracts of the solicitations, and then we self-grade our capability within that area, 1 to 4. And based on those numbers, the program director will assign those who rate themselves as number 1 in a particular area. They will be the technical and commercial leads to lead the rest of the group through. Now, all of us will read every proposal, but they will be the discussion leaders. And then we have a grading schedule that says these are the elements you want to consider. And we just do a very ordinal ranking of one of those 5 categories. It's been my experience that we usually get a pretty good consensus. If you get very goods, you get a few goods. If you get goods, you may get a fair. 12 years I was doing that. I only saw once where I saw an excellent and a poor in the same one. And that's when the fireworks start, because somebody has found something that they really want to ding, and the rest of the group has to make sure that it's a relevant challenge. All right, how do I like to see a proposal? I think it's very important to establish a story. Remember, it's a blank piece of paper at NIH and NSF. So you want to tell me a story about why this is a good thing to pursue. And it usually starts with some type of societal need or industrial need or something like that. I like the idea of starting with an identified need rather than a better mousetrap looking for a home. Technical elegance is not enough to generate an award. There's the incrementalism is fatal. We need a little context initially, get their mind around what we're going to be talking about. The story, the the reason for the story is it establishes some intellectual boundaries that you want the panel to consider your proposal. You don't want them taking excursions into something that doesn't matter. And the story reduces that tendency. They have to think in terms of your story. This is what we're chasing. We're not chasing what you think we should be chasing. It's what this is about. We encourage people not to engage in hyperbole. In many ways, it's a boring technical report. There will be people who will check your claims of need. The initial documents are usually heavily referenced to support your claims. And of course, we want to make sure that there's some element of differentiation. By that, we mean many of these panelists have experience in your area. And so they will, their initial bias, they will default to that area. And they will try to say, well, that's how you want to create the differentiation between out there. So you acknowledge that there are other programs out there that may address this problem. It's up to you to differentiate about why they're not successful or how you're going to take it beyond where that is, that kind of thing. All right, phase one, proof of concept, do the critical experiment. And it doesn't have to be a hardware generated experiment. It could be a software exercise. We're seeing more of that, computer modeling, particularly where, 256,000 is a lot of money and it isn't. It's not enough to go build a prototype in many cases. So we emphasize the innovative element. We, well-written proposals really are a lot better off because quite frankly, the reviewers like me are we have RAD disease, reviewer attention deficit disorder. You have to capture our attention. You have to make me want to read this and engage. And the clarity of the proposal does that. And this last item, third-party support letters, that's what they call the letters of support. And these are the things that you will learn when you go out and speak to prospective customers. This is part of the customer discovery exercise. And we can get into letters of support later on if you want, but they are third-party documents from people you've spoken to on their letterhead signed by a person in title. It says, we've talked to Bob, we like the idea, and there are various levels of increasing levels of support. That is, we think it's good, we urge you to support it. That's the plain vanilla type. You can say, this fits into our strategic need and we're going to support it with a grant. Or this is what we've been looking for, we're going to support you with in-kind testing, all those kinds of things. But the idea here is to demonstrate that you're out there talking to potential users and buyers, not sitting in the lab conjuring up why people should buy this. We meet at NSF headquarters in person, and we just go through everybody's comments, and then we just rank them in those three categories. I always find it amusing that we use little Post-it notes, and we write the proposal number on, and then we go up and we arrange them orderly in line on a board based on those three categories. And then we might move them around a little bit. In the end, the program directors will make the final selections and recommend to the senior staff, and we'll go into that timeline in a minute. The downside in this is, say we have 10 or 12 proposals, which is a common number. They really ask us to put only 2 or 3 in the highly recommended category. And what if there's 4 or 5 that really are good? So that's where the discretion of the program director is. And I think they've always kept a little bit of money off on the side to accommodate some of these that don't fit their pro rata percentages that they want. But you can't tell. In a way, you're a victim to the quality of the entire group of proposals as to who gets funded. All right, this is a question I get all the time when we start pitching clients about it. What are the odds? How am I going to win? Why should I, in this case, hire? And that's the only commercial pitch I'll give. This is from the DoD. 2017 is the latest data I could find. and their rate of selection was 19%. The phase 2 award rate of selection was 69%. At first, you might think that's the inverse of what it should be, but it turns out that the critical step in most of this is to show that this is a valid proposal. A lot of them get dinged for that. There's not enough critical market mass, so why fund it? The other thing is that the technology scope of work might be very weak. So it's as much a rating of the quality of the proposal as it is of the intellectual content. But once they've gotten past that, now they're in a much higher grade pool, and they can put together a logical work path, prototype path, whatever, and 69% get funded. Here are the numbers from NIH, a little bit higher out of phase, I'm sorry, that should say 2017 phase 1 award success rate was 29%, phase 2, 58%. NSF, they claim 10 to 15%, phase 2, 40 to 50%. Those numbers, particularly phase 1, is very heavily determined by the number of proposals we get. You know, it's a numerator, denominator kind of thing. And when the typical cycle, we might have gotten 800 to 900 proposals. And when the recession hit, that number jumped over 1,300. Well, the award pool didn't change for those periods. So obviously the percentages went down significantly. And that's where your 10% number comes in. Lately, I've seen them creeping up above 15%. And the same relationship between 1 and 2 holds at NSF also. Next question we get was, well, you know, do I want to do all this work and pay you guys to help me, et cetera? Well, about 3 years ago, NSF came up with this idea of saying, well, let's do a very quick scan of your idea. So you're encouraged now, you're required at NSF to do a project pitch submission, and NIH is encouraging it now too. Just here's our idea, and they tell you what templates and to use and what things to include in your pitch. And then you'll get a very quick response, usually within a week, of yes, this is worthy, go ahead, or don't bother. And that culls out a lot of anxiety for people. Okay, what's the downside? After I've been pitching this so hard, there is a downside. One is proposal prep can take 100+ hours. And that's for someone who's never done it and has to learn almost more than they have to write. And if you go to the SBA website, they say 200 hours. I think that's excessive. But 100 hours, yeah, I can believe that if you've never done it before, particularly the administrative side. The budgeting is very, very different. Government accounting is not like normal accounting. And so just to give you an example, our team, we have one individual who takes care of all the admin stuff, those registrations, the budgeting. I do all the technical writing. We have an accountant who takes care of all the budgeting and so forth. So it's dedicated people who have done this dozens and dozens of times. I get a question, can I do that? If you mean can, do I have the ability to do it? Yes, you do. It's just going to take an immense amount of time. It's a government program, and I will tell you, compliance matters more than the content. Doesn't seem fair, but it does. In my experience, solicitations and the instructions within those solicitations are not user-friendly. The only reason we can blow through them is we've done it many times. We know where to look for certain things, but we still go through it each time because they change. And the main thing, delayed response. You're not going to see money for 6 months after your submission. So this submission cycle ends at NSF December 3rd. Nothing will happen for the rest of the month. They'll just collate the proposals, make the program director assignments. They'll start to put their panels together in January. They'll start reviewing in February and March. They'll make their final decisions in April, late April. You'll get a notice, and the money, you won't see the money till early June. So it's 6 months. Now people say that's a long time to wait. Well, believe me, if you're going to get money from any place else, you're going to, particularly if you're pitching investors, you're going to see a similar timeline, at least 4 months. So it's not as bad as that first glance might suggest. What constitutes the commercialization plan? This is the one area that we find many clients get tripped on. They just don't know where to start because many of them are more technically oriented. This is where your business development person is going to help you, whoever that is. But in the end, it's about, can you find customers who will buy into your concept? And people say, well, I don't have a product yet. You conduct those interviews totally as a set of hypotheticals. If I had a product that did the following things, would there be any interest? And they say, well, maybe. And this is great because what you want is a discussion. So you'll say, okay, what spec values would you put on these variables? What would make it of interest to you? And that's a great way to proceed because in your proposal, then you say, in our customer discovery, customer X said, these are the 5 things that they want, and these are the quantitative values they're looking for. Now you've set up how you're going to proceed in your scope of work and development. Those are the questions, or those are the targets you've got to answer. Can you get a rejection resubmitted? Varies by agency. NSF says yes on phase 1, no on phase 2. NIH allows you to go second time on both. The 1.36 mil at the National Eye Institute was on a resubmission of a phase 2. Each proposal receives a detailed set of reviewer comments. In the mornings, we go through and we do our ordinal ranking on a general scale. In the afternoon, we spend all that time writing very specific comments about why it was accepted or rejected. And the rejected comments are to be taken as if you had addressed these issues, you would have had a much better chance of being approved. And I can tell you, we really write them with that idea in mind. And you should, some people get very upset that they are rejected, but we're telling you how to be accepted when we write those comments. And I can tell you, people who decide to go through the accept, I'd say 90% of the time they get accepted, unless there's some fatal flaw that there's no market. That they can't fix. All right, I think this is our last one. This is not really relevant to this initial process, but I get this question a lot. Is Shark Tank an accurate depiction of the angel pitch process? Yes and no. It's an entertainment program. The things I have seen, which I think are valid, is quick fire questions. They know exactly what to hone in on. They focus on the problem-solving aspect of an offering. And then once they're convinced it's real, then they'll start evaluation squeeze. You know, the guys say, the presenters will say, we think it's worth 5, and Mark Cuban will say, no, it's worth 2. And then they have to decide whether they're going to accept that valuation or not. The non-valid aspects, you know, the pitches are time limited, so they tend to be rather superficial. The rapid decision by the investors is totally uncharacteristic. As I said, you know, we'll take 3-4 months to deep dives, check out other people, all those things. And in that group, they'll take large stakes. Frequently, you know, the minimum investment in a lot of these angel guys is 10 grand. Well, if you're looking for 2 million, that's a lot of people you got to pitch. So many deals will get syndicated with other angel groups. When I was in Tucson, we did a lot with Tech Coast Angels in California, Phoenix Angels, and so forth. So the idea here is that you're not going to get the immediate resolution that you're looking for as suggested by Shark Tank. Okay, those are all the hardcore slides. Are you with me? Oh, shit. Allison, did we lose you?
Sincere. I didn't know if you froze. I'm here.
Oh, okay. I was worried. All right. So are there any questions or?
There aren't any questions in chat, but does anybody have questions at this time?
I had a question. So I actually had two questions. The first is regarding, like you were talking about becoming an entity. But I've talked to a lot of people, and their business advice of when to incorporate is the last possible time right before you sign a contract. So is it required to get an SBIR to be incorporated at time of submission or at time of money being granted?
No, fair question. I'll give you a diversion for a minute. That has to do with the team. People say, well, do I have to have the team in place today at time of submission or time of award? For that kind of thing, it's a time of award. However, I don't know how you're going to be able to register in all those sites I mentioned without some type of incorporation entity, and that's required to get an EIN. So my answer would be, if you want to submit, you have to incorporate. I don't see what the downside is of having an LLC. Why do they come at you and saying right before you sign a contract? What's the downside?
Just uncertainty. I don't know. This just.
Well, I mean, you can incorporate. I don't know what it is in Pennsylvania. Arizona, it was $30. I mean, what's the downside there? Actually, as soon as you start handing out cards and you don't have some type of, incorporation tagline, people are just going to say, "What is this, Ralph's Garage? What's going on?"
That's a fair point.
Yeah, I would. My suggestion would be to get your LLC in place, or what, eventually if you go to an IPO or they like to work with C corps, but that's a whole nother world. Now you got to file a tax return for a C corp, and LLC, it's just a pass-through tax entity, so it's much easier, much simpler for you until your project has some legs to it.
All right. So my second question was for this project pitch. I've heard that you have to submit this some amount of time before another deadline. So with respect to this December 3rd, I think, closing for NSF,
yes.
What does that mean for the project pitch? When would that, could you submit it still and get your full proposal in by the deadline?
Well, it's really a two-part question. Consider this. We just passed on a client who wanted to go with the December 3rd deadline. Because we told him 1 month with the Thanksgiving holiday is not enough time for us to do the proposal. So he had an invitation to submit, but he sat on it for 3 weeks. So, I would say the easy answer is you can submit your project pitch at any time. Then the constraint becomes, do you have enough time to prepare a proposal to meet the deadline? So for us, we tell people we want a minimum of 4 weeks. And it's not because of us, it's because of them. They have there's always 1,000,001 reasons not to sit down and write. It's the hardest thing to do. And it's easier to come, I'm going to go out in the lab, I'm going to do this or whatever. And so that's our experience with timing, project pitch proposal, whatever. If you think you have an idea, I'd go ahead and submit it. There's nothing wrong with submitting your proposal now, your project pitch now, say to NSF, and then waiting until the next cycle starts, December 4th. That works too.
All right, thanks. That sounds good.
Yeah. So you can do it.
Do we have any other questions?
Hey, Ralph. I understand. So these solicitations are primarily, they're open for NSF and NIH, but are there other open solicitations for other government entities like the Army, the Navy?
Yeah. You have to go to their websites. The DoD solicitations carry the moniker Broad Agency Announcements, BAA. What I do is I go to, say, the general website and just start typing in SBIR phase 1 solicitation, see what pops up. In the NSF one, you'll get it. NIH, you'll get it. The others, they may not have an open solicitation at that moment, you know. So it requires you to kind of keep scanning for them on a regular basis. And but if you use those keywords, you should be able to capture whatever's open at that time. And
Okay.
don't be afraid to change other permutations of different worlds. You know how that works in the internet search thing. So
Sure.
it's all keyword driven, and you just have to hit the right keywords.
So how many times does NSF a year do this with how many cycles do they have, I guess?
Well, they have 4 cycles a year, so, and it's a rolling schedule. This cycle ends December 3rd. The next cycle starts December 4th, and it's 3 months.
Okay, so say in a world I submit a pitch in 1 week, you guys would tell me, well, it's too early or too soon to the December 3rd guideline, but you can still be considered for the next quarter.
Yeah, but it doesn't automatically, NSF doesn't put a spot there for you in the next quarter. You still have to, they don't react until a proposal hits their door. So.
Oh, okay. So you have to pitch it again, conceivably, the next quarter, or?
No. What I meant was, you have approval to submit. I always interpret it as you have approval to submit anytime.
Okay.
But your next step is the full proposal.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Some of the agencies have examples of prior proposals that were funded. Not everyone does, and some of them aren't really, we don't consider them to be very instructive, but you can just see the layout. And as I said, there's certain rules. You have to use certain typeface, margins, all that kind of stuff. First person, third person, avoid exaggeration, client content. It's a very boring technical report. Consider it to be a peer-reviewed journal article. That's the kind of protocol you should follow.
And so let's say you're awarded a phase 1 contract. When you go to apply to a phase 2, are there, I guess it would depend on the contract, but are there certain metrics that you need to hit for phase 2 consideration, or is any phase 1 submission automatically mean you can apply for a phase 2, or?
Well, the first requirement of a phase 2 submission is that you were awarded something in a phase 1.
Sure.
Right? You won.
Yep.
So then in your phase 2, there is a space allowable for a download of your phase 1 report. Part of your award at the end of your award cycle is that you write a report. Here's what we tested. Here's what we got. Ergo, we're successful. And we want to go to phase 2. And there's a set of instructions on phase 2 about what's going on. It's all oriented now toward scale up and commercialization. So by then, we recommend that you have customers who are willing to do beta testing for you, and you have a design you want to try out. They're pretty far along. And the decision rule is, if we do all these things, we're ready for a rollout. And the question I always ask is, assume your device or your idea, whatever, it works. Who are you going to go see the next day? That's where you should be in your phase 2. You should be ready to go knock on doors.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, actually, Ralph, one more question.
Sure.
So are there any logistics on the size of your business? So let's say there's only 2 or 3 people. Does that hurt your chances, provided they fill the gaps that are expected to be filled for phase 1 submission, for example?
No. There are many. We're a little suspicious of a solo practice.
Sure.
Only because it's unlikely that person is an expert in all the areas that you need to be in business. But, we get a lot of proposals from 2 and 3 person teams. And then there's an outside guy who's going to fill a gap. And then another technique is to have a board of advisors, who are, usually these are like retired people maybe who have in-depth experience in that industry. That's a big positive, because it gives you another level of validation. credibility.
Okay.
And do we have any other questions? Okay, well, if we don't have any other questions at this time, I'd like to thank Ralph for coming today and leading our workshop. And this session will also be posted on our YouTube. So thank you, Ralph.
You're welcome.
I'm going
I'd
to
like to,
go ahead.
excuse me, I'd like to, my email address is on the very first slide. If you have some additional questions or you want to talk about your idea offline, feel free to do that. You know, you're like me, you know, you leave, you're in your car, and pretty soon, oh, I should have asked this, I should have asked that, I forgot, you know, that kind of thing. So feel free to approach me, and I'll be happy to try to resolve your question.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ralph. And thanks everybody for coming. And I'm